Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Kap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 23 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 5 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Kap. We are recording Thursday night. It is Thursday, October 3rd. It is right before Thursday Night Football, a fantasy-friendly Thursday Night Football game. You guys will be listening to the show on Friday. Historically, Thursday Night Football actually doesn't have a lot of points in it, but this actually is a fantasy-friendly game, so hopefully your players did well for you on Thursday night to set you up for the weekend. And Nick, we're heading into Week 5, dealing with injuries, dealing with our first bye weeks. There's some good teams on bye. I mean, the Eagles, the Lions. I mean, right there, those are some starting players.
A lot of fantasy players, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fantasy players. And I think the Chargers are on the bye too, and maybe one more. The Broncos. Are the Broncos on bye?
No, Broncos play the Raiders this week.
Broncos play the Raiders, okay. I think there's one more. I feel like they don't do odd
definitely
numbers.
one more. It's got to be an even number.
So, yeah, we're in the fantasy football season. We're in Week 5, and I'm not happy about it. That's kind of where we're at. I'm not happy about it. In our league, my team is banged up, and now I'm hit with like 3 buys. So, not fantasy friendly, but we're here to help you guys with your bye weeks, with your injuries. It is our Friday show. We're going to give you guys our all boom and all bust teams. I'll be frank with you guys. These are tougher teams to put together due to the nature of how me and Nick construct our teams. So it's going to be a little bit trickier, but that's what's going to happen with these bye weeks and injuries. There are less players to kind of pull from. So that means we have to kind of make cases for other guys. So it is our all boom and all bust team episode for Week 5. If we don't talk about players that are in your lineups and you still have questions, we have a live show Sunday mornings, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. We have one this Sunday, like we always do, 8:30 a.m. It's available on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We're doing that right before Sunday morning football. I don't know what we're calling it. Our London game of the Jets and the Vikings. So 8:30 a.m. Eastern times. Get your questions in before the London game. We'll keep going throughout the game. We're getting questions, but if you want to watch that football game, be on bright and early to get your questions answered. Make sure to join us for that. So we're going to go now to our all boom and all bust team, starting off with the all boom team for Week 5. So I do want to reiterate this point that we kind of talk about every week. So me and Nick's goal is to give you 14 different players for booms and busts. So what that means is we kind of have to cross-reference what players each of us has, but we also want to do it in a way where we don't know what players each of us has. So we do send it to our anonymous general manager. So Nick, did you have to change anybody for the all boom team? I had dibs on the all boom team. So Nick had 7 different players than I had. For the all bust team, I had to change 4 guys. So Nick got first dibs on the all bust team. So I really had to dig down deep on some of my all bust guys. But again, 14 different players for us to talk about. Let's get right into it. Nick, who is your all boom quarterback for Week 5?
So let's get into it. I know everybody's looking at me. They're like, where's the hat? We see the handsome mug, the fresh cut, right? We see all that.
Well, listen, sit up a little bit. Let's talk it up. Let's talk it up. There's our Knicks. There we go.
In New York, we're representing them with Cat. The NBA 2K announced we got 7 guys in the 80 overall. We're not a 2K show, though. We're not an NBA show.
That'll be the first time
fantasy football show, but we're talking New York, and we're talking all boom Aaron Rodgers in London, going up against the Minnesota Vikings defense. I know. Everybody thinks they're all that. Brian Flores. I don't care about Brian Flores. Aaron Rodgers is going to cook this team like he has historically. Last week, Minnesota Vikings allowed Jordan Love to be the QB2 on the week, close to 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. Vikings, they're pretty good against the run. Guess what? They ranked top 5 in most points allowed to the wide receiver and the tight end position. The Vikings defense has actually allowed the most passing yards in the NFL through 4 weeks. QB's averaging 275 yards per game against them. Rodgers, Wilson, Lazard, Conklin, Williams, all of them could have a good game, but that is all as the effect of Aaron Rodgers. If you're worried about Brian Flores and this coaching mismatch, fear not. 2022, Jets faced the Vikings. Robert Saleh going up against Kevin O'Connell. Guess what the Jets offense did? 486 total yards. The defensive personnel, very similar. I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, they switched over to Brian Flores. Brian Flores against the Jets in 2021 with Robert Saleh, not a great defensive coach. Jets had 7 touchdowns between those 2 games. And then you take a look at Sam Darnold, quarterback, who's been absolutely cooking. I know. Former Jet. We want to make fun of the Jets. Guess what? Guess who's watched more film on Sam Darnold than anybody? Coach Bob Saleh, who had to make the decision between Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold. He knows how to make Darnold turn into a ghost like the Patriots did a few years ago. And that's exactly what's going to happen. And my Jets are going to cook the Minnesota Vikings, win the game. Aaron Rodgers, 300 yards, book it.
300 yards. All right. So I'm going here with the Colts quarterback. And we don't know who the Colts quarterback is going to be, but I have a case for either. And that's because the Jaguars have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 22.2 through the fantasy football season. It's an average number, by the way. 3 out of 4 quarterbacks that have gone up against the Jaguars have scored 18 plus fantasy points. For Anthony Richardson, I don't really have to make a case. I mean, he is a huge rushing upside. He can sling the ball. Mostly deep, mostly inaccurate, but he can sling the ball. And if you drafted Anthony Richardson, I don't think you have a better backup unless you drafted Jaden Daniels as your backup. I don't think you would have drafted Anthony Richardson high and then brought in a backup. So if it's Anthony Richardson, he's playing, he's your boom quarterback. But if it's Mr. Joe Flacco, Mr. Cool Joe, I'm more excited about this one, honestly. Oh, yeah. Flacco had 15 fantasy points against Pittsburgh Steelers last week, and that's the number 1 defense against quarterbacks going into week 4. Not anymore, I don't think. In 2023, when Flacco played weeks 13 to 17, he had over 17 fantasy points in all 5 of those games. Then he had 20 fantasy points in 3 of those games. My co-host Nick was all over Flacco last year. I believe he even said to play Flacco over some of those big-name quarterbacks within the fantasy football playoffs.
Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. Those were
and I think, didn't you lose to Flacco because you had your Flacco take? Didn't you lose in a league or two to Flacco?
Yes, I lost to Flacco. Yes, I did.
So there you go. In our championship, did you lose to Flacco in our championship?
I'm 99% sure I did lose to
I think you did. I think Jared picked up Flacco and ran him throughout the playoffs. So,
yep.
I kind of would rather Flacco play.
Me too.
And Nick, I'm gonna jump here, and I'm gonna jump you a little bit. And I kind of want Flacco to play because I also have Michael Pittman as an all-boom wide receiver here. Michael Pittman's faced off again against the Jaguars, who allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers at an average of 34.2. With Flacco, though, last year, he was averaging about 17.3 fantasy points. Amari Cooper had double-digit fantasy points. With Joe Flacco he had 70.3 with Flacco last week, I should say. Before that, he had in a double-digit fantasy game this week. Last year, during the Amari Cooper played 4 games with Flacco last year. He had double-digit fantasy points in 3 out of those 4 games, including that 50-point bomb that won people. I think it was their semi-round or their championship. The Jags have also allowed 5 wide receivers to score 15-plus fantasy points. And last year against the Jags, Michael Pittman had 23.7 and 19.9. So it's a good match for Pittman, good matchup for either Colts quarterback. I would still play Pittman even if Anthony Richardson is the quarterback, but I would rather Flacco. I think he'll have a better game if Flacco's in there. So kind of jumped around here, Nick. You could take either one of your all-boom receivers here. Let us know who you got.
Sure, I'm actually jump a little further because I'm staying with this game. I'm going down to my flex, and that's Brian Thomas Jr., rookie receiver, wide receiver 14 on the season. He's getting overshadowed right now by the greatness of Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., ton of news on Worthy between all the injuries on the Chiefs team. There's been a ton of rookies getting a lot of buzz, and Brian Thomas Jr. being on the only 0-4 team left in the NFL. I think that's the case. Yeah, the only 0-4 team left in the NFL. Really getting overshadowed there, but he's been fantastic. And he's going up against the Colts, who allow the top 10 points at the wide receiver position. And the last 3 games against the Colts have not been great quarterbacks. So Trevor Lawrence, I know he has not been great this year. He's better than these 3. He's better than Caleb. He's better than Malik Willis, and he's better than Justin Fields. I don't know if he will be over the course of the rest of his career, but he's definitely the most talented at this point of the season that they've played. So he should easily be a harder matchup for a team already allowing a ton of points to receivers. So you should have no doubt that Brian Thomas Jr. should have one of, if not his best fantasy football day in his first 5 games of his career.
I'm gonna go to a guy I just mentioned in my last take. I'm gonna go with Amari Cooper, facing off the Washington Commanders, who allow the most fantasy points to wide receivers at 39.1. we're kind of still waiting for Amari Cooper to have like that game, one of his real boom games. He's at 8+ targets in all 4 of his games. So the target share is there and the opportunity is there. 4 games over 20 points, and 5 over, I'm sorry, against the Commanders, 4 wide receivers have scored over 20 points, and 5 other receivers have scored over 15 fantasy points. So they have a lot of points to receivers. This is an Amari Cooper boom game, and we'll see if he's able to take advantage of the really good opportunity. So who's your second wide receiver that you have?
I'm going with T. Higgins. The Ravens also ranked top 10 in points allowed to the wide receiver position. T. Higgins historically has dominated the Baltimore Ravens. Last year, he faced the Ravens once he missed the other game with injury. In that game, he had 8 catches on 12 targets, 89 yards, and 2 touchdowns. A couple years back, he had his best fantasy football game of his career. He had 43.4 points against the Ravens. I believe it was in the championship, if not later fantasy playoffs. He had 12 catches on 13 targets, 194 yards, 2 touchdowns, monster fantasy game. So, and those are actually the 2 best fantasy performances of his entire career. So this is a team he historically dominates. He has not had the breakout game. He has not had, as Nick just dubbed it, the boom game. So I'm really banking on T. Higgins getting back to form against a team that he has been at his peak performance in.
So we're going to go to running backs now. I'm going to start off here with whoever is the Texans running back. I really want it to be Joe Mixon, but I don't think he practiced today either with the ankle injury, which is kind of weird to me because I thought he was close to playing on Sunday. So I don't know. I don't know.
Back half the week.
I'm pretty sure he was very close to playing. He went into the game doubtful, but I think he tested it pregame. So I'm not sure why he's not practicing this week. I would love more confirmation from from the head coach and to kind of figure out what's going on there. But whether it's Mixon or Akers, they're facing the Buffalo Bills, who allow the most fantasy points to running backs at 32.5. All 4 running backs that they have faced so far, starting running backs, have had over 14+ fantasy points. Then Derrick Henry and Devon Achane have both scored 29+ fantasy points, both season highs in those games. I actually told you guys last week, don't play Zay Flowers against the Bills, and he only had 2 fantasy points. But I said the Bills allow a lot of points to running backs. Henry's going to be a great play. And Derrick Henry wasn't on my all-boom team last week because he's Derrick Henry. He doesn't go on the all-boom team, but I did make that point that he was going to have a big game. I may not have predicted 30+, but I thought he was going to have a big game. So Joe Mixon, before the injury week 1, at 26.8 fantasy points. So if Mixon plays, I think it's a super duper boom. Like I think Mixon is another 25+ game. If it's Cam Akers and you picked him up off the waiver wire, I just picked him up in a league actually 30 minutes ago. I think you're looking at a 15+ fantasy performance. He's still viable if he gets the volume. Like the Bills defense is actually very good against everything except for running back. So if I'm the Texans, I'm playing defense and I'm running the football, and we'll see if they go that route. So your first running back that you're going to boom this week.
I'm going with Josh Jacobs. He's a guy that I feel like I kind of love a lot more than a lot of people, but I think the stats kind of back it up. He's kind of been a big outlier this year for his fantasy numbers. He's averaging 18 attempts per game for 83 yards per game. He's averaging 4.6 yards per carry. That is top 10 in the NFL for any running back with over 50 rushing attempts through 4 games. All guys above him have a combined 31 touchdowns. Every single one of them has a touchdown. Jacobs has not found the end zone this year. But what's the big outlier is Josh Jacobs ranks top 10 in red zone rushing attempts. So he is bound to go get some touchdowns. And now he gets a matchup against the Rams, who allow top 5 in points per game to the running back position in the 3rd highest over/under game of the week. So Jacobs definitely going to have a coming out party in this matchup. Everything points in the right direction for his numbers to balance out by the end of the year and to be a great fantasy player. I think he's a great trade for candidate before your Sunday football starts.
So I have DeAndre Swift, who may have saved his season last week. Last week at 29.5 fantasy points against a bad Rams defense. Now he gets another just cupcake matchup. He's facing the Carolina Panthers, who allow the second most fantasy points to running backs and average of 28.6 points per game. Panthers have also allowed 17+ fantasy points to 4 different backs this season. So just because Andy Dalton has gotten the offense going, unfortunately, Andy Dalton doesn't play defense, and there's no saving that defense. I think they just lost one of their stud players for the season. I think one of their linebackers or something like that. So the Panthers defense is not going to get better. I'd keep playing your players against the Panthers defense, including running backs. And if the Bears want to win this game, they should run the football and really run this offense kind of through DeAndre Swift, whether it's on the ground or in the air, and just play defense. The Bears have a great defense. So that's their recipe for success, I think, and not forcing Caleb Williams to do too much, which I think he's kind of doing at the moment. So your second running back boom that you have for this week.
I'm going with Ramondre Stevenson. He's been very inconsistent. He had 2 great games this season. He had 2 bad games this season. Week 1 was one of his best performances against the Bengals. Horrible defense. Week 2 against the Seahawks. Not a bad defense, but not great against the run. Have not been for years. It's not a coaching problem. It's a personnel issue. And then the last 2 weeks was horrible against the 49ers and the Jets, 2 of the top teams against the running back position. But if you look at that, it's against bad defenses. This week, Miami Dolphins ranked top 5 in points allowed to the running back position. There's some concern for Ramondre for sure. The coach mentioned this week that if he were to fumble, Antonio Gibson could take that starting role and he could be benched. But the Dolphins have only forced 1 fumble the entire season. Statistically, we're banking on the side of the Miami defense does not force turnovers. So if Ramondre gets the ball, gets healthy, and does not fumble during this game, he should be locked into 15 to 20 touches, 100-ish yards, and hopefully hits.
Going to tight ends. I'm going to stick again with this Jags-Colts game. I'm going with Evan Ingram, who is practicing, I think, both days this week. I'm pretty sure he practiced today, I saw. He's a guy that you probably drafted top 7, in your tight ends. Top 5 tight end last year. Facing the Colts this week, who will have the 3rd most fantasy points, 2 tight ends at 11.7 fantasy points. They're not a good defense either. I think you could start all your Jags this week with a little bit of confidence at least. The Colts have allowed back-to-back tight ends to score 15 plus fantasy points. Then Evan Ingram against the Colts last year scored 9.9 and 11.1. Those aren't numbers that are jumping off the screen. But if you did draft Evan Ingram, you've probably been really struggling at the tight end position through the first 4 weeks. So you have a reinforcement. A reinforcement that has a good matchup to kind of get going to kick off his season. All right, who do you got at tight end?
I got Tucker Kraft, 17.3 last week, 2nd most targets on the team with 9 in that matchup. Going up against the Rams, top 10 against points with points allowed to the tight end position. The Rams defense has really been abysmal this year to kind of everything. And
everything, yep.
Category. So it's been a must target. Whoever you could play against the Rams, you kind of do it. And this is the 3rd highest over under the week. I talk about it all the time. If you want to play a tight end in a spot start, high over under is what you want to do, because tight ends, with how lackluster it's been, you're banking on touchdowns, and the over under measures points. That's what matters. So listen, with how bad the position has been, just shoot your shot. And why not go with a young tight end on a young offense expected to score a lot of points in this game?
All right. I'm going to keep it in that game, Nick. I'm going to go with Jaden Reed facing the Rams, who love the 6th most fantasy points, 2 wide receivers at a 30.9 number. Love is back off the injury. It took him a while to get going last week, but then what kind of got him going is finding Jaden Reed, which seems to be his number 1 target. He's 27 plus fantasy points in both games with Jordan Love this season. I could see that trend continuing. I think there might be another 20 plus point performance against a very bad Rams team. And this is a good get back game for the Packers. The Rams are they're one of the most banged up teams in the league. And if they were healthy, they'd be very competitive, but they are banged up. And this should be a get right game for the Packers. Your flex play.
I'm going with Brandon Ayuk, and I know what you're thinking. Brandon Ayuk in the flex probably should have been the wide receiver 1 on my list. Well, he has not played like it. He's not scored more than 10 points in any single game. The struggle has been terrible. But now he's going up against the Cardinals, who have been middle of the pack to the wide receiver position. Not great, not bad. Right down the middle. I believe they're 16 or somewhere between 16 and 20. So literally dead smack in the middle. But last year, Brandon Ayuk against this team, 9 catches, 185 yards in that matchup. I'm expecting him to play much better. First month, he really did not practice during the offseason with all the contract issues. So now that he's getting back into form, and Brock Purdy has looked really, really good considering all the weapons that haven't been there. So I think it's a very big opportunity here for Ayuk to get a get-right game in a divisional matchup and finally be on pace to be the receiver that we expected him to be.
All right, Nick, we're going to kick it to our all-bust teams here, and I'm going to go to you first. Who is your all-bust quarterback for Week 5?
I am going with Andy Dalton. I know what you're thinking. Andy Dalton can't be on an all-bust team. That's a horrible quarterback. Well, the last 2 weeks he was the QB8 and QB11. So a lot of people are starting him. A lot of people
it's a streaming week. So I mean, you don't have Jared Goff, don't have Jalen Hurts. Herbert's not even an option. So you're down some players here. If you drafted Caleb, you don't want to play Caleb. So he's in play at this point.
And I'm sure a lot of people want him. This is a revenge tour game. I actually saw this while doing the research. Andy Dalton's on his 5th team. He plays all 4 of the teams that he played for prior over the course of the season. He's already gotten a piece of the Bengals, and now he's going to get a shot against the Chicago Bears. But there's a problem for that. The Bears rank number 1 against the quarterback position.
Yep, that was my argument for CJ Stroud a couple weeks ago. So
yep. So here's the last 4 games, just so you know. Will Levis, week 1, QB 27 on the week. CJ Stroud, week 2, QB 16. Week 3, Anthony Richardson, QB 31. And Matthew Stafford last week, QB 30. So this is a horrible recipe. As much as you might like Dalton and the way he's playing, you might think you have a Joe Flacco situation from last year on your hands. I'm here to tell you it's more likely not going to be that. So let's not bank on him beating the team that's been number 1 through 4 weeks.
All right, so I am going to go with another guy that people have been streaming. It's Sam Darnold. You mentioned him before, and I think this is the game that Sam Darnold gets facing our New York Jets, who allow the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 8.9. I think that's what I saw on Fantasy Pros, unless I was reading it wrong. An average of 8.9 in 2024. They're also very good against quarterbacks last year. Allowed a 3rd fewest at 13.8. So this is not a good matchup for Sam Darnold. The thing is, though, the Jets have not really played good quarterbacks, so there's not really much for me to back it up against. Brock Purdy did have his lowest number at 10.3, but then the Jets have played Will Levis, Jacoby Brissett, and Bo Nix. So this is a test for this is going to be a really interesting game. It's in London. London games are wacky. It's going to be a test for the Jets to see how if they could get right, and also how good is Sam Darnold in this offense. I think they're fine, but I think the Jets still have a very good defense. And if Sam Darnold cooks them, I don't know if it's more of a Jets problem or if it's Sam Darnold's legit, but I'm not banking on that. If you have other options, which you probably should, so you probably got Sam Darnold off of waivers, go start the quarterback that you did draft ahead of him this week.
I like it.
Your first running back.
I'm going with Zach Moss. I talked about why I like T. Higgins.
I did have Zach Moss.
I talked about why I like T. Higgins, and it was because the Ravens are not good against receiver. The one thing they are great against is the running back position. They're the 3rd best team over the course of the season. And on top of that, Moss doesn't even look like he securely has this job. It's looking like it's trending more towards running back by committee. Chase Brown, 15 carries last week, scored more total fantasy points. I believe it was the RB7 on the week. And then you take a look at last season, it was Joe Mixon who was the running back for this team. And Joe Mixon was a very average runner against the Ravens. And Joe Mixon is definitely a better running back than Zach Moss. Last year, he averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Actually, over his career against the Ravens, 3.6 yards per carry. In 13 games, he only scored 4 touchdowns against this defense. Harbaugh has been the coach the entire time. Defensive-minded coach, not a great matchup for Moss and this team. So you're going to need to bank on the passing work. But if you take a look, right now he's only getting 3 catches per game, which is not terrible if you pace it out over the course of the season. But the Ravens don't allow running backs to catch. Last week, James Cook only had 1, Rico Dowdle had 3, Zamir White had 3, and Pacheco had 2. 3 of these 4 games also had positive game scripts for running backs to catch the ball. So if the game script is going the way that the Bengals want it to, then they're going to be running the ball and they're not going to be doing it efficiently against this team. And if it's going the opposite way, the Ravens don't allow the running back to catch the ball. So it is all touchdown or bust. But as I mentioned earlier, Joe Mixon only scored a touchdown in about 1 of every 4, 1 of every 3 matchups against this team, who is a much better running back. I am not trusting Zach Moss in this offensive line to give him enough work to get in that end zone.
I'm going to go with James Cook, who's been a little bit inconsistent this season due to the Bills' offense having a lot of inconsistency. So now he's facing the Texans, who allow the 8th fewest points to running backs, an average of 16.4. These are the backs that they faced so far. Jonathan Taylor had 10.8. That's a low. DeAndre Swift at 8.2. ETN at 7. They've let under 10 fantasy points to all 3 backs, and all 3 were season lows with those running backs. So tough matchup for James Cook. Probably can't bench him due to the lack of depth in that position, but it is not a good matchup. So temper those expectations. Your second running back, who do you got?
I'm going with, as you mentioned, a group in the first segment. I'm mentioning a whole group here. I'm going with the whole Cowboys backfield. It is a mess at the moment. We don't know who the starter is going to be. And even if we did know who the clear starter was going to be, I still don't like the matchup. The Steelers are top 3 against the running back position this season. Rico Dowdle, who we went into the season hoping would have the lead snap share, hasn't broken 50% yet. Zeke broke 50% in week 1 at 51%. And then the last 3 weeks since then, it went 51, 40, 19, 18% snap share. Now they have this random running back, Loop Key. No idea who that guy was going into this week. Got 52% of the snap share, was the leading guy on the field, but he only got 2 carries and 2 targets. So this is really an absolute disaster. I'm gonna not call my shot, but something that I think the Cowboys should do. They like making moves. Jerry Jones likes doing it. He likes trying to get guys at good values that can change the team. Well, there's one guy on that is a very solid running back that you could confidently give 70, 80% snap share. Good pass catcher, good enough, better runner than everybody got on this team. That team's 0-4. Travis Etienne going into a contract year. If I'm the Dallas Cowboys, I'm making that call because I don't think they're going to land Devontae, and you definitely need a playmaker back there, and Etienne can provide that for you.
Okay. All right. We're now going to go to my second running back. I have Brian Robinson, who I feel like he's been on one of these teams, every other week, and he probably will remain. Facing the Browns, toughest matchup yet for both Brian Robinson and the entire Commanders defense. The Browns have allowed the 7th fewest points to running backs, an average of 16.2. 3 running backs that have faced the Browns so far this year have scored under 15 fantasy points, 2 under 10. So it's going to be a tough matchup for Brian Robinson. If I'm the Browns, I'm loading up the box and really trying to force Jaden Daniels to throw it. But I mean, the line isn't good for the Commanders, so I will start Jaden Daniels every single week. But this is going to be a tough matchup for everybody on that Commanders defense, or I should say, Commanders offense. Your first wide receiver.
I'm going with Chris Olave. Going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who rank top 10 against the wide receiver position. And he's going to get shadowed by Trent McDuffie. And I know what you're thinking. McDuffie was the cornerback 2 last year. Is he stepping up to the 1 role? Well, he has been. He's been great against the top wide receivers. As I mentioned, top 10 for the entire team. And the quarterback, Derek Carr. I know what you're thinking. Revenge game, Kansas City Chiefs division rival. Well, here's what his career has looked like against this team. Against Patrick Mahomes, 1-9. Against Andy Reid, 3-14. In his entire career against Steve Spagnuolo, 8 interceptions in 7 games. This is the best Chiefs defense he will have faced in his entire career, the entire time that he was there. This is a defense that knows his tendencies, and I'm not expecting Chris Olave to be great. I think he's going to look like he did in week 1 and week 2. He's going to have a very tough matchup. I honestly think if anyone has a good shot in this game at the wide receiver position here, it is Shaheed, because they're going to need that deep threat. With McDuffie on the 1, you're going to have Shaheed against the 2, which is a much better matchup. So Olave, I don't think you're going to be able to bank on volume in this matchup. So it is going to be touchdown or bust.
All right. My first one here, I don't love it, but I'm gonna stake my my flag on this side of the field, and I'm busting Stephon Diggs. It's a revenge game against the Buffalo Bills, but I actually think it might be a revenge game for the Bills defense. I think there was a little bit of a falling out there that might come out in a 30 for 30 at some point, but I think Diggs got phased out of the Bills offense last year. If you look at his numbers from weeks 8 to 16, they were not great. He was losing people fantasy football matchups. And the Bills have been very tough against wide receivers, allowing the second fewest points at 15.5. The numbers here, Marvin Harrison, 1.4, that was a low. Tyreek Hill, 6.6, that was a low. Jalen Waddle, 8.5. Brian Thomas, 9.8, that was a low. And I just busted Zay Flowers last week at 2.2, and that was a low as well. If I'm the Bills, I mean, I think that defense has some revenge game against Stephon Diggs. I think the game plan might be to take out Diggs, and I see a lot of fantasy analysts actually saying go play Diggs. So he's probably not a guy you can bench. I would love to be on the right side of this, though. I think that'd be really funny. So I'm busting Stephon Diggs.
I like it.
Who's your second wide receiver you're busting?
So I love making stacks in these teams, and I'm going to stack Andy Dalton with his wide receiver one, Deontay Johnson. And again, just like I said, the Bears, one of the top teams against the quarterback position. The Bears also top 10 against the wide receiver position. And I know what you're thinking. The volume for Deontay has been great. Think about the volume for Deontay throughout his entire career. When he was with Kenny Pickett, he was horrible for fantasy. He couldn't find the end zone. He was catching 50-ish% of his balls. And guess what? If Andy Dalton doesn't play well, it's going to look just like DJ Moore. A lot of those Carolina fans are going to get some PTSD to watching DJ Moore be open, get 170 targets, and catch like 75 to 80 balls on the year. And that was over the course of a season. So I'm saying that I don't think the volume of Deontay Johnson is going to be great. And I think he'll get the targets. I don't think it'll translate to fantasy numbers. There are 3 receivers I have here: Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman. All went up against this Bears defense. All 3 of them kind of rely a little bit more on the volume than the explosiveness, and maybe Calvin Ridley a little bit less. All 3 of them scored less than 10 fantasy points in that matchup. So if you want to bank on volume, this is not the matchup to do it against a Bears defense that has honestly been great.
All right. I'm going to go with Trey Tucker. I did want to go with Devontae Adams, but Devontae Adams is not going to play another game for the Raiders. So I'm going with Trey Tucker, who's had back-to-back games with double-digit fantasy points. However, now goes and faces the Denver Broncos, who allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 16.2. Patrick Surtain, talked about him before, best corner in the league. If he's gonna shadow, that's gonna be a problem. If you pick Trey Tucker off of waivers, good claim by you, but this is not the week to play him. Keep him on your bench. Your tight end, who do you have?
I'm going with Dalton Kincaid. Houston ranks top 3 against the tight end position. To be fair, they really have not played a great tight end this season, but then again, who has been a great tight end this season? And listen, I'm looking at matchup here. The points definitely matter. It's been a key to success. Last week, the Ravens, what they tried to do was stop the middle of the field. They tried to take away James Cook and Dalton Kincaid as best as they could. That was kind of their success to winning. And I think DeMeco Ryans is going to look at that and he's going to say, guess what? I was a cover linebacker. I know how to cover the tight end position. And that's probably why for the last 2 years, the Texans have been really good against the tight end position. So I'm going to fade Kincaid this week. You probably have to play him because the position's weak, but I would say temper expectations. But what tight end haven't you tempered expectations for this season? I mean, at this point, we're literally just shooting shots on top guys because not a single one of them has been great.
I'm going to go with Trey McBride, who's coming back off the concussion injury, going to face San Francisco 49ers, who allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to tight ends, an average of 4.4. Don't like that number. I think the 49ers might really zone in on McBride. I mean, Fred Warner, best linebacker in the league. So that does concern me a bit. Again, same thing that Nick said. I think it's tough to bench a star. So I don't think I'd bench him, but again, temper those expectations. Your flex spot, who you have?
I'm going with Jordan Addison, Minnesota Viking, going up against that Jets defense. He had a great game last week off of his time injured against the Packers, but the Packers were missing their top 2 corners. They don't have Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed back there. So listen, it is a horrible matchup. And I know what you're thinking. DJ Reed's not that great. The Jets have had DJ Reed covering the wide receiver 1 for more often than not this season. And they've left Sauce on an island against the number 2. They've been doing I would guess, if based off what I've seen from the Jets, it'll be DJ Reed on Sauce with a safety, or on Jefferson with a safety over the top, and they'll leave Jordan Addison with Sauce one-on-one, and he'll be on an island. That is a horrible matchup. And I know what you're thinking. Sauce, he's overrated. Listen, look at the stats. Over the course of 4 games this year, he's been targeted 10 times and only allowed 7 catches. That is great for for a defense, for my team, not great for a fantasy receiver. So listen, I think Addison's got better days ahead. We saw Jalen Naylor look good for the first 3 weeks. While Jordan Addison was injured, I think Addison will slot into this role very well down the line, but they're on a bye next week. He's not going to play great. They'll go back to Minnesota and they'll figure it out by week 7, and Jordan Addison will be a good play.
Again, because of the nature of our all boom and all bust teams, there just weren't a lot of busts that I liked at this point. So I'm just going with another tight end. I'm going with David Njoku, and this is a player that's coming off of the injury, facing the Commanders defense. And the only thing the Commanders defense is actually pretty good at, and that's guarding tight ends. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends at 2.5. So Njoku coming off the injury, Deshaun Watson has been a mess. And Njoku didn't play well with Deshaun Watson last year either. So this is actually a tight end I'd recommend keeping on the bench. Whoever you've been starting in place of Njoku, I think it's going to be a better play for this week.
I like it.
All right, so before we get out of here, I believe Nick might have a player here. Nick might have a player that you're going to stash on your team. You can pick him up. If you're listening on Friday or Saturday, pick this player up before Sunday, and if this player does go off, then you've beaten the waiver wire system. Some players that we've given you so far have been Bucky Irving, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Tolbert, who might have a good game this week, considering no Brandon Cooks, and Romeo Doubs, Roshan Johnson. The Johnson, was a deep shot, but obviously last week with Swift playing well, that might not be a great one. But those are some players that we have given you guys so far. So Nick has a player. I couldn't really settle on one, but Nick does have one here that he's going to give you.
Nick mentioned his name earlier. I like him for a long-term stash, but I actually do like him this week. I have Trey Tucker. I like the opportunity that he was given the last 2 weeks. Davante Adams is bound to get traded. I think it's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. I don't know where it's going to be, but I have my feeling. I have my sources, my anonymous sources. I don't have any sources, but I have my gut, and my gut is telling me he will either be a New York Jet or I will be severely let down. But regardless, he is not going to be a Raider over the next 2 weeks.
I don't think he plays another game for the Raiders.
I don't think so either. I saw reports that the hamstring injury is real. I would guess even if it is Lingerton a little bit longer than he wants, he will spend one less week trying to try and force that trade out of there. Nick mentioned the Surtain matchup, which is true, but I think Surtain's probably going to look at Myers for most of the game. He's the bigger receiver, and it makes more sense for Surtain to shadow there. And the Broncos, yes, they've been very good against wide receiver, but the last 2 games for Trey Tucker, 15 targets, 140 total yards, 2 touchdowns, 22.6 points and 15.4 points in those matchups. Very, very solid fantasy day. And it's not just that it's been good this year. Actually, at the end of last year, we started seeing pieces of it. Over the last 4 weeks, he had 2 games one where he scored 14 and one where he scored 20.7. Without Davante Adams last week, he had an 85% snap share. So I don't know if you can trust playing 2 Raiders wide receivers every single week. But what I do know is that once Davante Adams is traded, the opportunity is there. So I want Trey Tucker on my lineup. And in ESPN, he's still only rostered in 14% of leagues. I think that's a big mistake, especially with the Davante Adams trade news coming out. I think he should be closer to 40, 50%. And if he plays a good game this week, he should be above 70%, because
he probably won't play a good game this week against Denver, but I would still get him before
he belongs on benches.
Yeah,
he should not
be on benches. Yeah,
there's players that should be dropped, and I wonder Tuesday we'll probably do some a little bit more of stash trash, and on Sunday you could always ask us if there's someone you could drop for him, because again, Nick and I both in line with this. He needs to be on your bench, on your roster at the minimum.
Yep. Alrighty, guys. Well, that is our show before week 5. Are all boom and all bust teams. And again, we can only talk about 14 players, but if we didn't talk about the players on your roster and the start sit questions you have, join our Sunday morning live show at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Get your questions in before that 9:30 a.m. kickoff. I'm sure Nick's going to have a monitor or something next to him, keeping an eye on the game. I'll open up a tab on my computer as well. So we might even be doing the show while the game is going on, at least through the first quarter. Our first 4 shows through the season have all gone over an hour, and we're happy to sit here and answer your questions as long as you guys are asking them. So YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Join the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast this Sunday. If you enjoyed this episode and you're watching on YouTube, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hopefully you subscribe after this episode. Smash that subscribe button. Click the little bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live or post a new video. Drop a like on this video and any video that you do watch in the future. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform like iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review, and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We appreciate that as well. If you're on social media, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. It's Primetime FF Pod on Twitter, and then Instagram's Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you have any questions during the week, I know we got a question this morning for Thursday Night Football, for example. We can answer those, directly on our social media channels. So thank you guys again for listening. Enjoy Thursday Night Football. I guess hopefully you did enjoy it, and we'll talk to you guys Sunday on the live.